We start, though, in Washington in the years-long discussion of race and how congressional maps are drawn. The Supreme Court is considering a case that could undermine the last surviving parts of the Voting Rights Act. Today, justices heard arguments related to Louisiana's congressional map, and that case is over whether states can consider race when drawing electoral lines. In 2024, the Louisiana House redrew lines to include a second majority black district. The High Court initially heard arguments on this back in March, but did not issue a decision before its term ended. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson was listening into court today and broke down what we heard.
It's really hard to read the tea leaves here, but it looked like towards the end of the arguments that there were justices who were coalescing around a proposal that the Department of Justice had provided, which is essentially I don't want to say compromise, but more of a middle ground where maybe some of the precedents are, as Justice Barrett said, weakened, or she said clarified or modified.
And CBS News election law expert David Becker joins us now. He's also the executive director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. David, thanks for being with us this afternoon. So how does this case actually impact who gets to vote and how much their vote counts?
Yeah, in a state like Louisiana or in many states, black voters or minority voters form a minority of the voting population. And we see in some states like Louisiana, where the white voting population tends to vote differently than the black voting population. In other words, the candidates that black voters prefer are being defeated by white voters for a variety of reasons. And this is, of course, exactly what the Voting Rights Act was designed to protect against. It was designed to implement the 15th and 14th Amendments of the Constitution to prevent that kind of activity and effectively shut minority voters out from any representation. And it's unusual here that the Supreme Court, where a majority of justices have already enforced the Voting Rights Act, a majority of justices currently sitting on the court as recently as a couple of years ago, are now considering whether that act might be unconstitutional 60 years after its implementation.
Yeah, certainly one to watch here, David. If the court does end up siding against Louisiana, though, what kind of response could we potentially see from other states?
Well, I mean, we could see states where, with large minority populations, backtrack and go back to the days that we used to see before 1965. It's not that difficult if there's no restraints like the Voting Rights Act around there to essentially what's called crack minority populations. You might have a state with a roughly 30% black population, and then you could draw districts that basically have 30% of black population in each of the districts, meaning that the candidates that black voters prefer would never get elected. That's exactly what the Voting Rights Act was intended to prevent against. And it's worked remarkably well, particularly in states like Louisiana, where we still see that kind of racially polarized voting.
So, David, this is all happening against the backdrop of states like Texas moving forward with redistricting plans of their own. It's been a busy season for that. Talk to us about how this all relates to gerrymandering. Could there be a problematic effect on minority voters overall?
Yeah, we should note the Voting Rights Act is not about protecting Democrats or Republicans or protecting the rights of minorities to vote for Democrats or Republicans. When I worked for the Department of Justice under two different administrations, I sued both. I mean, that happens all the time. But it may be in this era where both parties are trying to squeeze out every last district because that majority in Congress is so narrow that this restraint that said you could not dilute the minority voters' ability to elect candidates where they were large enough to form a district. That's going to be gone, and we might see states do even more redistricting, change lines more often, and we might see a reduction in the ability of minority voters, Latinos, black voters, et cetera, being able to elect candidates that they think represent them.
David Becker, thank you very much for joining us.